My name is Margaret Doyle. And the moment my husband leaned across the kitchen table, slipped those divorce papers in front of me, and said, "This will finally set you free," I realized freedom was about to have a cost. But the one paying it wasn't going to be me. I remember staring at the thin stack of papers, the blue ink pen he'd laid neatly on top, as if all I had to do was sign away 30 years of my life with a simple flick of the wrist. His tone was calm, practiced like a salesman trying to soften the blow of a bad deal. But his eyes gave him away. Cold, calculating. Somewhere behind that thin smile, he thought he'd already won. "Set me free!" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. The kitchen clock ticked too loud, filling the silence. Outside, a late autumn wind rattled the maple tree by the window, scattering golden leaves across the lawn. The smell of burnt toast still hung in the air. Ordinary morning, extraordinary betrayal. Extraordinary. He pushed the papers closer. "Yes, free from all this, free from the weight. You deserve it." But what he really meant was he deserved it. Free from me, free from responsibility, free to run into the arms of whoever had been waiting in the shadows. The lines around his mouth tightened when I didn't immediately pick up the pen. For years, I'd been the one smoothing the rough edges, carrying the weight-making excuses. Now suddenly, I was a burden to be dropped like yesterday's news. My mind reeled back to the woman I used to be, the young girl in a white dress standing in front of a church full of hope, believing in forever. That girl didn't recognize the man across from me now. The one who could dismiss 3 decades, 2 children, and a lifetime of promises with the stroke of a pen. I didn't cry. Not then. The tears would come later in waves that left my pillow damp and my chest aching. But in that moment, something else stirred inside me. Not rage, not yet. Something quieter, deeper. A seed of defiance buried under years of compromise, finally cracking open. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap, studying him the way I used to study case files, back when I worked part-time at the law library. Every detail mattered. Every word, every gesture, every slip of the tongue could be evidence. He thought I'd just roll over too tired to fight. He thought he could write the script for how this story would end. But I knew something he didn't. Freedom wasn't free. And sometimes the one demanding it had to pay the highest price. The weeks that followed blurred together, but I remember the details with the sharpness of fresh wounds, the way he'd hum while packing boxes like he was moving into a brighter future, the way his phone buzzed at odd hours, his smile tightening when he saw my eyes on him, the way the house suddenly felt colder even when the heat was on. Friends called. Some offered sympathy, others tried to play neutral. My sister asked if I'd seen this coming. Truth, I hadn't wanted to. There had been signs, sheer longer hours at work, the scent of unfamiliar perfume on his shirt, a new password on his phone. But I'd been too busy keeping the family afloat, too invested in keeping the peace, too afraid of what I'd find if I looked too close. And now here, it was laid bare in black and white, his version of freedom. One night after he'd fallen asleep in the guest room, because he'd insisted we stay under the same roof for now, I crept into the kitchen and spread the divorce papers out on the counter. The words swam under the yellow light. Legalese clauses, demands. He wanted the house. He wanted the retirement savings. He even wanted to dictate how often I could see the grandchildren when they came along. That's when the quiet defiance in me began to harden into resolve. I wasn't going to be steamrolled. I wasn't going to let 30 years of my sacrifices vanish into his tidy little narrative. If he wanted freedom, fine. But freedom was going to cost him. I touched the edge of the papers, imagining the courtroom, the judge's gavel, his smug expression cracking when the truth finally hit. I didn't know yet exactly how I'd get there, but I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't walking away empty-handed. For the first time in months, I slept soundly that night. Not because I was free, but because I finally understood his words might have started the war, but mine would finish it. The morning after he slid those papers across the table, I stood at the sink rinsing coffee grounds while the radio murmured old Motown songs we used to dance to with bare feet on the kitchen tile. The window fogged from the kettle, and beyond it, the maple threw dappled light across the lawn. If you'd walked past our house right then, you would have said, "Now that's a life. That's a marriage done right." And for years, that's exactly what everyone said. We met at a church picnic in '94, paper plates, potato salad kids running after a dog we later learned belonged to no one. He was Tom, then not Thomas, with sleeves rolled to the elbow and a laugh that traveled. I brought lemon bars I'd overbaked. He ate two and swore they were perfect. That fall we rented a small apartment with a radiator that hissed like a cat and a view of somebody else's fire escape. We were broke, but our calendar was full of firsts. First Christmas in mismatched chairs. First car that needed a prayer to start, first fight about paint colors. We couldn't afford anyway. We said we'd build a life that fit like a well-worn sweater, soft at the edges, warm without trying. Our children came like seasons. Claire arrived on a blizzard night, pink and furious, a fist the size of a plum. Michael showed up in June, lazy and sun-warm, sleeping through his first thunderstorm, like he trusted the world. Sundays smelled like bacon and orange zest from my pancake batter. School nights were spelling lists and science projects at the kitchen table, while Tom graded insurance claims at the end of it, pen, uncapped between his teeth. In the fall, we raked leaves into ridiculous piles and let the kids cannonball until they were red-cheeked and breathless. We didn't have much, but everything felt like ours. People loved us. Our church, our cul-de-sac, the PTA moms with their clipboards, and kind gossip the dads who pushed lawnmowers in crooked lines. At potlucks, Tom carved the turkey and told jokes that landed. He opened pickle jars for women who rolled their eyes and said we keep him around for the heavy lifting. He served on boards, ran 5Ks for causes, shook hands with men who smelled like aftershave and soft power. If there were cracks, they were hairline at first. A meeting that ran late, a phone face down on the counter, a new cologne that didn't smell like him. Promotion talk, he'd say, loosening his tie. Big quarter, they're watching. I believed him. I wanted to. After the children left for college, I took a part-time job back at the law library. I liked the quiet of cataloging, the paper dust smell of old cases, the feeling of putting things where they belonged. Tom teased me, "You and your systems," but he said it fondly, and we kept humming. Then, systems began to change. "We should simplify," he announced one September, setting a neat stack of statements on the table. "Streamline the accounts, consolidate." He used words that sounded like progress, efficiency, clarity, protection. He brought home a glossy brochure for a new financial app and set it up on his phone, while mine stayed stubbornly analog with sticky notes on the fridge. "Don't worry about it," he said, and kissed the top of my head. "Isn't it nice to be taken care of?" Was it? I held that question in my mouth like a lozenge that wouldn't dissolve. On our 25th anniversary, we booked the good restaurant with the white tablecloths and the waiter who knew to bring me sparkling water without asking. Tom ordered a steak and a bottle of something impossible to pronounce. We toasted to the next 25. He smiled and the candlelight made his face younger. Later in the bathroom, where the mirror softened truths, I pressed a hand to my chest and told the woman, "There, you're lucky." She nodded back because we were both so practiced at agreeing. The first time I saw a deposit slip that didn't make sense, it was folded in the pocket of his jeans I pulled from the dryer. West Harbor Credit Union. We didn't bank there. The amount was round, like someone guessing at a number, $2,500. When I asked, he didn't flinch. "Short-term investment," he said, "voice easy." Some friends at the gym. These community accounts give you better rates for a bit. Gym friends. Community accounts. Words arranged like flowers to hide the dirt. Then came smaller withdrawals that didn't belong to our rhythm. $180 here. $320 there, memo lines that said nothing. When I mentioned them, he laughed. "You're turning into your mother," he said, and I laughed too, because my mother could squeeze a quarter until it begged mercy. But that night, I lay awake listening to his steady breathing and thought about all the noises money makes when it leaves a beep, a click, a door you don't hear close until you feel the draft. The intimacy we once wore like a second skin became a jacket he could shrug on and off. He started sleeping in the guest room on those late nights so he wouldn't wake me. He'd leave before dawn for training, though he'd never been a morning person. He brought home a bottle of cologne with a name like a city you visit to feel expensive. It didn't smell like us. When Claire played her senior recital at the university an afternoon of Bach and nerves and my heart in my throat, Tom texted that he couldn't make it. Client emergency. I took his empty chair anyway and clapped until my hands stung. Afterward, I sent him a video I'd clumsily filmed from the front row. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji. The tiny blue thumb made me angrier than 1,000 words could have. People still said we were solid. At Christmas, he strung lights so precisely the neighbors joked he should teach a class. He delivered cookies to the elderly couple at the end of the street. He posted a photo of us in front of the tree, my head tilted on his shoulder, his smile close-lipped and camera clean. 30 years, and going strong, the caption read. The likes rolled in like a tide. My sister commented with heart emojis. I stared at the screen and felt like I was watching a version of us acted by kinder, truer people. Control arrived dressed as care. He started correcting small things, how I sliced onions, how I folded bath towels, how I spoke to the waiter. Just trying to help, he'd say, and kiss my cheek, and I would swallow the apology forming on instinct. He took over bills to save you the headache, and when I asked for the login, he said I'll write it down later. Later never landed. In the evenings, he sat angled away from me, blue light painting his face, thumbs moving quickly. News he'd say if I glanced over. But the times his screen flashed a name, once a simple C, the phone turned face down so fast it could have broken the table. I told myself stories I could live with. He's stressed. He's scared of aging. He's lonely. He's trying. I repeated them like a rosary until the beads wore smooth. One night in May, we drove home from a benefit dinner held in a ballroom chilled to meat locker temperatures. The car purred. My heels were in the cup holder, my feet in stockings on the dash. He looked handsome in the passing streetlights, the way men do when you remember their best age. We should travel, he said, eyes on the road. See the world. But not the same way, maybe. Separately, sometimes. Space is good. He said space the way a realtor says open concept, like it solves everything. That summer, he pushed the idea of simplifying again. It helps. He said if we ever need to pivot quickly. Pivot. He'd never used that word before except about office furniture. He spoke about trusts and beneficiaries, about avoiding headaches for the kids. He was patient when I asked questions. Too patient, like a teacher with a slow student he liked enough to tolerate. By Labor Day, the house looked the same to a stranger, but different to me. The bowl on the entry table held a key fob I didn't recognize. The laundry basket contained a shirt I'd never washed, a brand he joked we couldn't justify. He bought new towels in a color I didn't choose, and when I said I preferred white, he laughed. Freedom from bleach, he said, grinning. Freedom again, like a drumbeat under every harmless sentence. Looking back now, I can see he'd been rehearsing that line to me long before he spoke it. We were the picture everyone admired because the frame was straight and the glass was clean. Inside, a corner had already lifted. The morning he said, "This will set you free," I realized he'd been practicing his version of freedom for years. Less accountability, more secrecy, a future that didn't include me unless I was quiet and useful. He thought he could name my freedom and hand it to me like a party favor. He didn't yet understand that freedom comes with a bill. He was so certain I'd pay it. He was wrong. My name is Sarah Whitman, and for most of my life, I believe secrets belong to other people's families, the ones you shook your head at in the grocery line when their scandal made the local paper. But secrets have a way of slipping under your door like winter air, and once they're in, you can't keep the house warm, no matter how high you turn the thermostat. The first time I heard him whisper, I wasn't supposed to. It was a late September evening, the kind where the air carries both the memory of summer and the threat of frost. The kind of evening when I'd usually open the back door just enough to let the crickets sing into the kitchen while I chopped onions for stew. That night, Tom had excused himself after dinner, phone already buzzing in his pocket. He kissed the crown of my head, as if it were a habit, not affection, and said, 5 minutes. His footsteps went down the hall, steady, confident. I thought nothing of it until the click of the guest room door closed. We never closed doors in this house, not unless there were tears on the other side or secrets. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and carried a glass to the sink as if running water could explain why I lingered in the hallway. The guest room light pooled across the floor, a thin line under the door. His voice floated through, lowered, urgent, but contained, like a man in church who wants to shout but remembers where he is. "Just let her sign it," he said. My blood cooled. The voice on the other end was muffled male. I couldn't make out the words. "We'll take it all. She won't fight." The glass slipped from my hand into the sink, clattering, but not breaking. I froze. My heart hammered so hard I thought he must hear it. "We'll take it all." The words buzzed in my skull like wasps in a jar. It wasn't the phrase itself, but the we. Who was we? He ended the call quickly. The door cracked open. I darted back into the kitchen, grabbed the wooden spoon, stirred the pot as though it could anchor me. When he entered, he smelled faintly of cologne and static from the phone pressed too long to his cheek. "Everything okay?" I asked, careful, casual. "Fine." He kissed my temple too smooth. "Work. Work doesn't whisper about taking it all. Work doesn't hide behind a closed door in your own home." That night in bed, he fell asleep in minutes. His breathing was deep, slow, untroubled. I lay still, eyes on the ceiling, while his words replayed again and again. "Let her sign it. We'll take it all." I wanted to shake him awake and demand the truth. Instead, I stared at the ceiling fan, spinning shadows on the plaster, realizing for the first time in 30 years that the man lying beside me might not be the same man who once ate my burnt lemon bars without complaint. The days after blurred. He acted the same, coffee-poured, mail-sorted meetings mentioned in passing, but I began noticing things I'd ignored before. The way he angled his phone away from me, the extra key on his keyring I didn't recognize, the stack of envelopes he kept in his briefcase instead of leaving on the counter. One afternoon, I followed him. It felt ridiculous at first, like a bad movie plot. But something in me, the part that had cataloged legal files for years, the part that noticed when one book was a centimeter out of line, wouldn't let me sit still. He said he was heading to the office, but instead his car turned toward the next town over. I kept 2 lengths back, my fingers white-knuckled on the wheel. He parked outside West Harbor Credit Union, the same name I'd once seen on that stray deposit slip. I watched him go in with a folder tucked under his arm. When he came out 20 minutes later, his face wore a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months. He looked relieved, almost triumphant. The anger in me was hot and quiet, the kind that doesn't shout but waits. That evening, he brought home takeout, set the cartons on the table with a flourish. "Thought I'd give you a night off." His generosity sounded rehearsed. I thanked him because to do anything else would have been admitting I knew something. Lying in bed later, I replayed that whisper again. Let her sign it. Papers, divorce papers, financial documents. My signature was the key, and he thought I would hand it over without question. He thought I was still the woman who trusted deposit slips she didn't recognize, who laughed at gym friends and community accounts. But something had shifted. That night, I made a decision I would no longer wait for the truth to be handed to me. I would dig, and I would listen, and I would prepare. I didn't know it yet, but that whisper, the one I wasn't supposed to hear, wasn't just the beginning of his plan. It was the beginning of mine. Because freedom, as he liked to call it, was about to change hands. I began simply because suspicion without evidence is just paranoia, and paranoia is what betrayers love to accuse you of. The morning after that overheard call, I stood at the kitchen counter, sipping coffee, staring at Tom's briefcase. He'd left it behind in his usual rush. The leather was cracked along the edges, familiar as his own hands. My pulse pounded as I flipped the latch. Inside the same stack of manila folders, thick with papers, their edges frayed from being handled too much. One folder bore my name. My fingers trembled as I pulled it out. Inside, photocopies of our mortgage, property deeds, retirement accounts, everything we'd built together. But the last page froze me. It was a draft of a separation agreement. My name printed neatly, a blank line waiting for my signature. The language was clinical equitable distribution, voluntary consent, but buried halfway down was a clause that would hand over full rights to our house, my inheritance from my parents' estate, and even part of my pension. Not equitable, not even close. And the part that chilled me most, his signature was already there. Bold, confident, as if my part was just a formality. I snapped the folder shut, shoved it back, closed the briefcase, and stood there with my chest heaving like I'd run a mile. My husband wasn't just preparing for divorce, he was planning a theft neatly wrapped in legal language. That evening, I didn't confront him. Instead, I rehearsed calm. I made meatloaf. We watched an old rerun of Columbo. He laughed at the detective's wrinkled raincoat. I smiled, though I was memorizing the tone of his laugh, filing it away as evidence. I started small, gathering information like breadcrumbs. At the credit union, I requested copies of joint statements. The teller glanced at me with pity, the kind of pity women share when they sense another woman has been wronged. But she printed the pages. Line after line of withdrawals I hadn't made. Transfers labeled vaguely. Always to the same secondary account, not in both our names. I didn't let my hands shake until I reached the car. The next step was harder listening. At night after Tom fell asleep, I tiptoed to the guest room and plugged in the baby monitor we'd boxed up years ago. One receiver on my nightstand, the other tucked behind a stack of books where he often took calls. That monitor crackled to life 2 nights later, just past 11. "She won't suspect," he whispered. "Once she signs, we're clear." My breath caught. "Don't worry," the male voice replied. "Courts don't dig deep when the signatures are there. We'll be fine." We. Again, always we. I clicked the monitor off my fingers, numb. It wasn't just betrayal, it was conspiracy. The next morning, Tom hummed in the shower. Hummed. I wanted to scream. Instead, I buttered toast and tucked a note into his briefcase like the old days. "Don't forget your umbrella." I smiled when he kissed my cheek, but beneath the table, my hand gripped the chair so tight the wood dug crescents into my palm. Quietly, I reached out for help. Not to friends, they would whisper, and whispers spread. I drove 30 miles to a law office in another town, a place where no one would recognize me. The attorney, a woman with sharp eyes and a voice like gravel, listened without judgment. "You did the right thing," she said after scanning the separation draft. "If you'd signed this, you'd be left with scraps. He's banking on you being too trusting to read the fine print." She slid the papers back. "Do nothing yet. Keep pretending and bring me everything." So I did. I copied bank statements at the library, hunched over the machine like a spy. I photographed documents with my phone while Tom showered. I wrote down every overheard word, every suspicious absence, every odd purchase. The puzzle pieces were ugly, but they fit together. And all the while, I played my part. I laughed when he cracked jokes. I asked about his late nights at work. I baked banana bread, his favorite, though the smell of it made my stomach churn. He kissed my forehead, oblivious. He thought I was still asleep beside him at night, unaware of his whispered calls. But inside, I was sharpening something sharper than anger resolve. There was a moment, a turning point, when I realized the balance had shifted. It was early November, leaves clogging the gutters, the air brittle with cold. Tom handed me an envelope after dinner, his smile easy. "Just some paperwork to look over," he said. "Nothing urgent." My fingers tingled as I slid the papers out. The same separation draft polished, now clauses tightened, language slicker. He tapped the page where my signature line waited. "Take your time." I looked at him. Really looked. At the man who once held my hair back when I was sick, who danced barefoot with me in the kitchen after our wedding. And at the stranger who now smiled like a predator, waiting for the trap to snap shut. I smiled back. "Of course. I'll read it carefully." His relief was visible. He patted my hand. I knew you'd understand. But he didn't know me anymore. Because I wasn't going to sign his freedom. I was going to cost him his. By the time November gave way to December, my house had become a stage and I had become an actress. Every smile, every nod, every kiss on the cheek was a costume piece I wore to keep Tom convinced that his play was going as written. But behind that mask, the storm gathered. The attorney I'd hired, her name was Margaret, became my secret ally. A tough woman in her 60s with salt and pepper hair pulled tight and a mind as sharp as a scalpel. She didn't waste words, and I appreciated that. Each time I slid across another document, she tapped. It made notes and built my defense like a mason laying bricks. "You're ahead of him now," she said one evening, leaning back in her chair. "He thinks you're sleeping. He thinks you're blind. But you're wide awake, Sarah. Don't you forget that." Those words carried me home. Meanwhile, Tom was tightening his net. Unaware, I was already cutting through its cords. He brought home flowers one night, roses white and fragrant, though I knew he'd never thought to buy them in years. He poured wine. He toasted to new beginnings. "New beginnings?" I asked, tilting my glass. He grinned, the kind of grin that doesn't reach the eyes. "You'll see. Everything's going to be easier soon. For both of us." I smiled, clinked his glass, and swallowed bitterness disguised as Cabernet. The holidays came. The house sparkled with lights, the air scented with cinnamon and pine. But underneath the carols, my life hummed with tension. On Christmas Eve, we hosted our neighbors, just like every year. Tom carved the turkey, cracked jokes, poured eggnog like a man who had nothing to hide. I played along laughing when I had to handing out cookies with sugared smiles. But inside, I burned. I kept thinking, how many of these people will be shaking their heads in pity when they hear his version of the story? Late that night, when the guests had gone and Tom snored in his recliner, I sat by the tree. The twinkling lights blurred through tears I hadn't let fall in weeks. I whispered, "God, don't let me break before this is over." Because the weight of pretending was heavy, pretending to love, pretending not to know, pretending I was powerless. But I wasn't powerless. In January, the bank froze the suspicious account, thanks to Margaret's careful filings. Tom's face when he opened his statement that morning was priceless. I watched from across the table as his brow furrowed, lips pressing thin. He folded the paper too quickly, muttered something about a clerical error. I buttered my toast. "Everything okay?" "Fine," he snapped. The storm gathered thicker, swirling, pressing in. His calls grew more frantic. The whispers I caught on the monitor were no longer smooth. They were sharp, panicked. "No, I don't know what happened. It was there last week." One night, I heard him slam the receiver down so hard the lamp rattled. And I knew the walls of his carefully built house of lies were starting to crack. But still he thought I was oblivious. He handed me papers again gently, this time coaxing. "Sarah, darling, these will help us both move on. Just read and sign." I looked him in the eye. His face was lined with stress now, but still confident. He believed he held the pen to my future. "I'll read them carefully," I said, echoing my earlier promise. I watched something flicker in his eyes, hesitation, doubt. But then he smoothed it over with a smile, kissed my forehead, and walked away. That night, in the quiet of my locked car, parked 3 blocks from home, I handed those very papers to Margaret. She skimmed lips, curling in disdain. "This is worse than before," she said flatly. "He's getting desperate. He's trying to rope in your family property now, claiming it as marital. He thinks if he pressures you enough, you'll break." "Will the judge see through it?" I whispered. She met my eyes. "Not unless you fight, but you've got the receipts now. You've been gathering just like I told you. Sarah, this isn't just a defense. It's a counterstrike." I nodded, though my throat felt tight. A counterstrike. It sounded like war. And war was what this had become. Back home, I found Tom, staring at the fireplace, his face shadowed. He didn't look up when I walked in. "You seem tired," I said softly. He chuckled, bitter. "Funny. Freedom was supposed to feel lighter." Freedom, that word again. his holy grail, the thing he believed was his salvation. But freedom has a cost. And for the first time, I realized deep in my bones he was about to pay it. The storm wasn't gathering anymore. It was almost here. By the time the hearing date arrived, winter had hollowed the trees and iced over the sidewalks. The courthouse loomed gray against the slate sky, a building that smelled of dust and decisions. I'd never been inside a courtroom before. Movies make it dramatic, polished, almost theatrical. The truth is quieter, heavier. The air hums with restrained tension. People file in with lowered voices, clutching papers like lifelines. Margaret walked beside me, her heels clicking with certainty I couldn't quite muster. She handed me a tissue for your palms. "Not your tears?" she said with a dry smile. I tucked it into my fist, grateful. And then he walked in. Tom, dressed in a navy suit I'd ironed countless times back when ironing his shirts felt like love. He moved with confidence, chin high, but I noticed his hand twitch against the briefcase he carried. He saw me and offered a smile. Rehearsed, charming, meant for the gallery. Inside I trembled, outside I nodded. We took our places. The judge, an older man with a kind but firm gaze, entered. Everyone rose, then sat again, the scrape of wooden benches filling the silence. And then it began. Tom's attorney, a slick fellow with a silver tie, spoke first. His words were smooth, deliberate. He painted Tom as the devoted husband who'd simply recognized a marriage grown stale. A man who wanted peace, fairness, freedom. Freedom, he repeated, like it was a blessing, like it was a gift. I sat still, my nails digging crescents into my palms. Margaret leaned close. "Breathe," she whispered. Then it was our turn. Margaret rose, her voice calm but sharp as she outlined the evidence. The hidden accounts, the false claims, the whispers behind closed doors. Each piece fell into place like iron nails in a coffin. Tom shifted in his chair. I watched his jaw tighten, his knuckles whiten around the armrest. The confidence he'd worn began to crack. And then the moment came. The judge holding the papers Tom had so desperately pressed into my hands. He read aloud the clause that Tom had tucked into the shadows. The one meant to strip me of the family land, the savings, even the jewelry my grandmother had given me. As the words echoed through the chamber, the courtroom stilled. Tom's face, oh, I'll never forget it. The blood drained, his eyes widened. Lips parted, but no sound came. He looked stone-carved, a man watching his own mask shatter. I sat motionless, though inside a tide rose. Rage, relief, sorrow, all at once. My heart thundered so loud I worried it might drown out the judge's voice. Margaret stood firm. "Your Honor, my client has been patient. She has endured deception, manipulation, and betrayal. She did not come here to steal. She came to survive. And survive she will." Tom's attorney stammered, shuffled his papers, tried to object, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. His words cut through the room. "This court will not reward deceit. Mrs. Whitman retains full rights to her property, her savings, and due compensation for damages caused by her husband's actions." The gavel struck once, sharp, final. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. Beside me, Tom's shoulders slumped. He looked older, suddenly smaller. The man who had promised himself freedom had instead shackled himself to the weight of his own schemes. When it ended, we stood. People filed out quietly, whispers trailing like smoke. I glanced at him once more. He didn't meet my eyes. Couldn't. Margaret touched my arm. "You did it." I shook my head. We did it. But deep down, I knew it wasn't victory I felt. It was something quieter, something heavier, a recognition that the war was over, but the wounds remained. Outside, the winter air hit my lungs sharp and clean. Snowflakes drifted, catching in my hair. For the first time in years, I felt light enough to stand tall without pretending. Tom had promised freedom. He just never realized it wouldn't be his. And the cost? The cost had finally been paid. Months have passed since that winter day in court, but I can still feel the echo of the gavel in my bones. It wasn't just wood striking wood, it was the sound of an ending and perhaps the faint beginning of something new. Life, as it always does, carried on. Bills needed paying, laundry, piled up groceries had to be hauled in from the car. But beneath those everyday tasks was a quiet shift I couldn't ignore. I no longer lived in fear of whispers behind closed doors. I no longer woke wondering what secret might spill out next. I lived in truth. And though truth can be painful, it is steady. It doesn't slip through your fingers. Tom moved out of state, I heard. Rumors filtered back through friends of friends. A smaller apartment, a new job that didn't pay as well as the old one. A man who once prided himself on being untouchable now faced the weight of consequences. I didn't celebrate that. Not really. His downfall wasn't my victory. My victory was simpler. Waking up to silence that wasn't tense, stepping into a kitchen that no longer smelled of resentment, smiling without bracing for a sharp word to cut it down. I remember one morning in spring sunlight poured through the windows like honey. I made coffee black and strong and opened the back door to hear the birds. A simple moment, ordinary. Yet tears filled my eyes because it felt extraordinary. That's the thing about survival. It doesn't always look like fireworks or grand gestures. Sometimes it looks like sipping coffee in peace. Sometimes it sounds like laughter when you'd almost forgotten your own voice. People often ask if I regret it, if I regret the years I gave the trust I placed in a man who shattered it. And the truth, no. Because regret ties you to the past, like an anchor. I choose to carry lessons instead. I learned that freedom isn't given. It isn't wrapped in papers or whispered as a promise. It is carved, hard-earned, sometimes fought for in the quietest, loneliest ways. I learned that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it is the steady breath you take before walking into a courtroom. Sometimes it's the signature you place on a document knowing the storm it might unleash. And I learned that love, real love, begins within. Do I still ache? Yes. Marriage was not just vows. It was years. Memories' roots twined together. To untangle them leaves scars, but scars remind us we healed. Now when I look in the mirror, I see a woman who has walked through fire and come out not unburned, but unbroken. I see eyes, steadier shoulders, straighter, a soul that knows her own worth. Tom once told me divorce would set me free. He said it with a smirk, believing freedom was his prize to dangle before me. He never understood that freedom carries weight, that the cost of deceit is heavy and someone always pays. But the one paying wasn't me. So to you listening, maybe you've carried betrayal or loss or a storm that made you question your own strength. Maybe you felt like the ground would never steady again. I want you to know this survival is not a single moment. It is a series of steps. Some small, some staggering, but each one moving you forward. And freedom, true freedom, is worth every step. If my story touched you, if it reminded you of your own journey, or gave you hope for the path ahead, I invite you to share it. Share it with someone who needs to hear that survival is possible, that justice can prevail, that peace can return. And if you'd like to walk with me through more stories of resilience, heartbreak, and the quiet triumphs of everyday people, I welcome you to subscribe. This isn't just about me, it's about all of us who face the storm and live to tell. Because stories remind us we are never truly alone. Thank you for listening.